So what if I told you that two people could be diagnosed with the exact same, like, severe, life-altering medical condition, and yet they share absolutely zero overlapping symptoms?
It sounds impossible, right?
I mean, yeah, you'd think there would be some common ground, but picture this. One person is, restlessly pacing the room, they're dropping weight, and they are totally unable to sleep.
Right.
And then the other person is practically catatonic, sleeping like 14 hours a day and gaining weight rapidly.
Yeah.
But both of those individuals get the exact same medical label.
Which is wild to think about.
It really is. Welcome to today's deep dive, where we are taking a huge stack of clinical history, psychological research, and modern biology to fundamentally rethink everything society tells us about clinical depression.
Because we really do have a lot of misconceptions to clear up.
We do. We've all seen the movies, right? We've heard the casual conversations. We are conditioned to think depression is just, being really, really sad. But our mission today for you listening is to completely dismantle that myth.
Exactly. We are going to explore the actual biological reality of this condition.
Right, and how a single psychiatric checklist from the 1980s changed medical history, and why the whole chemical imbalance story you've probably been told is, well, basically missing the mark.
By a lot, actually.
Yeah. Okay, let's unpack this. Treating depression like it's just sadness is like treating a hurricane like it's just a heavy rainstorm. It completely misses the structural damage happening on multiple levels.
That is a great way to put it.
Thanks. I mean, it ignores the wind, the pressure changes, the flooding. You're
Yeah.
looking at one small, visible element and mistaking it for the entire devastating event.
And what's fascinating here is that the official medical definition of depression is explicitly designed to separate ordinary human unhappiness from a diagnosable impairing disorder.
Wait, so there's an actual rigid line.
Yes, our modern architectural blueprint for this condition is actually incredibly strict. So if we really want to understand why clinical depression is not just sadness, we have to start with the rule book that doctors use to define it.
Okay, lay it on me.
It's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, specifically the DSM-5-TR.
The famous DSM. Okay, so doctors aren't just sitting in a room, like guessing if someone is sad enough. They're referencing a very specific diagnostic threshold, right?
Exactly. They are using what's known in the field as the 5 of 9 rule for major depressive disorder, or MDD.
5 of 9 rule. Got it.
Right. So to receive a diagnosis, a patient must exhibit at least 5 specific symptoms out of a possible 9. And these symptoms must be present nearly every day for at least 2 consecutive weeks.
2 weeks every day.
Yeah, and they have to represent a clear, observable change in how that person normally functions.
I feel like if you're listening right now, you might be mentally reviewing a rough couple of weeks you've had recently, right? Like counting up on your fingers.
Oh, for sure.
So what are the actual 9 symptoms on this menu?
Well, the first 2 are sort of the gatekeepers. You must have either a consistently depressed mood most of the day, or you have to have something called anhedonia.
Anhedonia. What exactly does that look like?
It's a profound loss of interest or capacity for pleasure in almost all activities. So say you used to love playing guitar. Now it feels like holding a piece of dead wood.
Wow, that's dark.
Yeah, it's a complete emotional flatline. So if you have one of those 2 gatekeepers, clinicians then look at the rest of the list. This is where we see significant weight or appetite changes.
Like the example we used at the start.
Right. It can be dramatic weight loss or rapid weight gain. Then there are sleep disturbances. So either insomnia, where you're just wide awake staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m., or hypersomnia, where you physically cannot get out of bed.
I want to pause there for a second because that highlights something crucial. We are talking about basic bodily functions here, right? Like metabolism and circadian rhythms being completely hijacked.
Yes.
So this isn't just a mindset issue at all.
Not even slightly, and it goes further. We also see what's called psychomotor agitation, or retardation.
Wait, psychomotor what?
Agitation or retardation. It's a visible physical change. It's not just feeling sluggish on the inside. A doctor or a family member can actually observe you moving through the world like you're walking through wet concrete.
Oh, wow. So it slows your actual body down.
Yes. Or conversely, the agitation side is pacing until your feet literally bleed. On a biological level, we are looking at disrupted dopamine signaling that affects the actual movement pathways in the brain.
That is terrifying. What are the rest of the symptoms?
The final ones round out the cognitive side. So profound fatigue, feelings of absolute worthlessness or excessive, almost delusional guilt.
Delusional guilt.
Yeah, feeling responsible for things you couldn't possibly control. Plus, a diminished ability to concentrate. And finally, recurrent thoughts of death or suicidal ideation.
Okay, but even with those severe symptoms, there has to be some kind of dividing line, right? So I'm thinking, going through a terrible breakup could trigger 5 of those easily. You can't sleep, you lose your appetite, you feel worthless.
That is a very real point. And the ultimate dividing line in the DSM is functional impairment. The symptoms must cause clinically significant distress that actively disrupts your social life, your job, or your basic ability to survive.
So you can't just be having a bad week where you're still going to work and seeing friends.
Right. But your point about the breakup hits on one of the absolute fiercest debates in modern psychiatry.
Really?
Yeah, it's called the categorical versus dimensional debate.
Oh.
See, the DSM treats MDD categorically like a light switch. You have 4 symptoms, the light is off, you're fine. You hit 5 symptoms, the light switches on, you suddenly have a disorder.
Wait, so it's basically a math problem. If you have 4 symptoms, you're just having a hard time. But you check a 5th box and boom, you have a medical condition. That feels entirely arbitrary. I mean, human emotion doesn't snap to a grid like that.
Many researchers argue exactly that point. They believe depression is dimensional, more like a dimmer switch. It exists on a fluid spectrum from normal low mood all the way up to severe paralyzing illness.
That makes way more sense.
They argue the 5-symptom cutoff is really just a bureaucratic convenience drawn for insurance billing, not a true natural biological boundary.
I imagine drawing hard lines in the sand like that causes some massive controversies in the medical community.
It really did. It caused a seismic rift fairly recently over something called the bereavement exclusion.
The bereavement exclusion, what is that?
Prior to 2013, the DSM actually instructed doctors not to diagnose major depressive disorder in someone who was grieving the recent death of a loved one.
Even if they hit the 5 and 9 threshold?
Even if they hit the 5 of 9, unless the symptoms were exceptionally catastrophic, doctors were told to hold off.
Well, I mean, that makes total sense. If you lose a spouse, you are obviously going to experience anhedonia and insomnia and a depressed mood. It's called being a human being.
Exactly. But the DSM-5 removed that exclusion.
Wait, they took it out. Why?
Well, critics warned it was a terrible mistake, saying it would medicalize normal grief, essentially telling patients that their natural mourning process was a psychiatric disease.
Which feels so wrong.
It does. But the defenders of removing the exclusion pointed out a brutal medical reality. Severe grief can, and absolutely does, trigger genuine major depressive episodes.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, they argued that denying a grieving person access to medication or structured therapy simply because we knew why they were hurting was leaving them to drown in a highly dangerous state.
Wow, that is a staggering ethical dilemma. Because on one hand, you want to honor a broken heart, but on the other, you don't want to withhold a life preserver from someone who is drowning just because they have a quote-unquote good reason to be drowning.
Exactly.
But taking a step back here, this entire system, counting symptoms, checking boxes, it feels so rigid. Why did psychiatry adopt this multiple choice test approach in the first place?
To understand that, we have to travel back to the 1970s, because historically, low mood was recognized as an illness way back to 400 BCE.
Right, the ancient Greeks.
Hippocrates called it melancholia and blamed it on an excess of black bile.
Ah, the classic medical scapegoat. If in doubt, just blame the bile.
Pretty much. But by the mid-20th century, American psychiatry had moved from bile to Freud. Psychoanalysis completely dominated the field.
Okay, couches and talking about your mother.
Right. The prevailing medical theory was that depression was driven by unconscious conflicts, unresolved childhood trauma, or, most famously, anger turned inward.
Anger turned inward. That's an interesting phrase.
It was theoretically rich, but the issue wasn't the theory itself. The issue was the clinical reality. Psychoanalysis relies entirely on a doctor interpreting your unconscious mind.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah, you could send the exact same patient to 2 different psychiatrists on the same day, and they would walk out with 2 totally contradictory diagnoses.
That destroys any credibility you have as a medical science. You can't run a healthcare system if the diagnosis depends on the personal philosophy of the doctor you happen to see on a Tuesday.
Precisely. Psychiatry was facing an absolute existential crisis of reliability. No one agreed on anything.
So how do they fix it?
The revolution came in 1980, led by a psychiatrist named Robert Spitzer. He chaired the task force for the DSM-5, and he ruthlessly purged the manual of all those unprovable Freudian theories.
You just threw them out.
All of them. He introduced the explicit, atheoretical checklists we still use today. The manual stopped caring entirely about why you were depressed and only focused on what your symptoms were.
So Spitzer basically created a standardized multiple-choice test for psychiatry to save its scientific credibility. But didn't they lose something by totally ignoring the root cause of the pain?
They absolutely did. If we connect this to the bigger picture, Spitzer basically traded explanatory depth for clinical consistency.
Right.
Because it's just symptom bean counting now, we end up with the paradox we discussed earlier. Two people with an identical MDD label can have zero overlapping symptoms.
Because it's just checking boxes.
Exactly. And critics argue today that this atheoretical checklist made it dangerously easy to overdiagnose the condition, which conveniently paved the way for massive pharmaceutical overreach in the decades that followed.
But wait, while Spitzer was building these checklists that completely ignored the why, there had to be people in the field who were still obsessed with the underlying mechanics of the depressed mind, right?
Oh, definitely. Two pioneers in the 1960s were doing exactly that, Aaron Beck and Martin Seligman.
What did they find?
Well, Aaron Beck was actually trained in classical psychoanalysis. He set out to scientifically prove that old Freudian idea that depression was anger turned inward. He had his patients free associate, expecting to uncover these deep, hidden wells of repressed hostility.
But I'm guessing the data didn't cooperate.
It rarely does. Beck observed something completely different. His patients weren't secretly angry. They were plagued by spontaneous, automatic thoughts of loss, deprivation, and defeat.
Just constant negativity.
Yes. He formalized this discovery into what he called the cognitive triad. He proved that depressed individuals develop a consistently negative, distorted view of three specific things: themselves, the world, and the future.
So, like, I am broken, the world is terrible, and it will never get better.
Exactly those three. I am broken, everything is impossible, and it will never get better.
So what does this all mean, really? If we look at Beck's triad, it suggests depression isn't just a mood you fall into, it's this self-reinforcing cognitive filter. Like wearing extremely dark sunglasses and totally forgetting you have them on. You look around and think the sun has died, not realizing the mechanism you're using to process reality has been fundamentally altered.
That is a brilliant analogy, and it's exactly what's happening. It explains why you cannot just tell a depressed person to snap out of it.
Right, because to them, it's just reality.
The illness actually alters their cognitive processing and motivation. You can't use willpower to overcome a distorted filter that you truly believe is objective reality.
That makes so much sense.
And this realization birthed cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. Beck showed that by methodically identifying and challenging those distorted thoughts, you can actually rewire the filter, which subsequently lifts the mood.
Wow. Which brings us to the behavioral side of things, right? Martin Seligman's work at the University of Pennsylvania around the same time.
Yes, Seligman's learned helplessness experiments are foundational to understanding depression, though I should note they are highly controversial today regarding animal welfare.
Okay, what did he do?
He exposed dogs to inescapable electric shocks in a controlled environment.
Oh, man.
It's tough to hear, but the critical phase came later. He moved those same dogs into a new enclosure where they could easily escape the shock simply by stepping over a very low barrier.
Okay, so they just jump over and they're safe.
That's what you'd expect. But because they had been conditioned by the inescapable shocks earlier, they didn't even attempt to step over the barrier. They just lay down and endured the pain.
Wait, really? They just gave up?
They had internalized the belief that their actions had zero impact on their environment. Meanwhile, a control group of dogs who had never experienced the inescapable shocks, they jumped the barrier immediately.
That is so sad.
It is. But Seligman realized this models human depression perfectly. When a human being experiences repeated situations where their effort yields no result, say chronic poverty, continuous systemic failure, or inescapable abuse, they generalize that helplessness.
So it creates this profound, paralyzing passivity. Like, nothing I do matters, so why try?
Exactly.
That is heartbreaking because it means the brain is essentially trying to protect itself by shutting down effort,
Yeah.
but it ends up trapping the person entirely. Though, didn't Seligman eventually pivot his research?
He did, thankfully. He realized that if helplessness could be learned, then resilience could be learned too. So he shifted his entire career focus to learned optimism, focusing on training the brain to identify agency even in difficult circumstances.
Okay, so we've established that depression rewires your cognitive filter and your behavioral responses. But this leaves a massive gap for me. If this is a psychological phenomenon, why does it physically hurt? People describe feeling it in their bones.
The physical reality of depression is severely overlooked in popular culture. We're talking about unexplained chronic pain, debilitating gastrointestinal issues, and this crushing leaden fatigue.
Yes, the heavy exhaustion.
Yes, Countless people spend years visiting general physicians, getting MRIs, running blood tests for their chronic pain before anyone finally connects the dots to depression.
Which brings us to the absolute elephant in the room, the biological explanation we've all been sold since the 1980s, the chemical imbalance theory.
Ah.
The story is so simple. You are low on serotonin, the quote-unquote happy chemical.
Yeah.
So you take an SSRI, it tops off your serotonin levels, and you are cured. Just like taking insulin for diabetes.
It was an incredibly successful, destigmatizing marketing narrative. When drugs like Prozac hit the market, it told patients, hey, this isn't your fault, it's just biology.
Which sounds great.
It does. But the scientific evidence for a simple serotonin deficiency was always remarkably thin. This all culminated recently in a massive 2022 umbrella review led by researchers including Joanna Moncrief.
And what do they find?
They synthesized decades of research and found that there is no consistent evidence that depression is caused by lower serotonin activity or lower concentrations in the brain.
Wow. Here's where it gets really interesting, because when that study dropped, there was widespread panic. People thought it meant antidepressants were a scam.
Right, which wasn't the case at all.
Exactly. The review didn't say the drugs don't work.
Yeah.
It just said we fundamentally misunderstood the mechanism. Taking an SSRI for a chemical imbalance is kind of like taking an aspirin for a headache.
I love that comparison.
Because, the aspirin definitely reduces the pain, but it doesn't mean your headache was caused by an aspirin deficiency in the first place.
This raises an important question about how we actually model the illness and how neurobiology really works. The medication provides relief, yes, but it is not fixing a neat, singular chemical deficit. In fact, we've actually known the serotonin theory was flawed for decades because of something called the SSRI delay paradox.
Let's explore that mechanism, because I've read that when you take an SSRI, it floods your brain's synapses with serotonin almost immediately, like within hours.
It does.
So if a lack of serotonin is the problem, you should feel great by lunchtime. But doctors always tell patients it takes up to 2 to 6 weeks to work. Why is there a delay?
The delay suggests the immediate serotonin boost is really just the first domino. Current research theorizes that the influx of serotonin slowly triggers a secondary process. Things like neurogenesis, which is the actual growth of new neurons, or the rewiring of neural pathways in regions like the hippocampus.
So it's literally rebuilding parts of the brain.
Exactly. That physical remodeling of the brain takes weeks, which beautifully explains why the mood benefits are delayed.
Okay, so if depression isn't just a chemical imbalance, and it's not just a Freudian subconscious conflict, what actually is it? How does a modern doctor define the root mechanism?
The modern medical consensus has really embraced the biopsychosocial model. It states that depression is never just one thing. It is an intricate, colliding web of biology, psychology, and your social environment.
So it's everything all at once.
Yes, it's your genetic vulnerability combined with your early childhood adversity, filtered through Beck's cognitive distortions, and finally triggered by current social stressors.
And those social stressors aren't just hurting your feelings, right? They are literally changing your biology through something called allostatic load.
Yes, allostatic load is a critical concept here. When you experience chronic stress, whether that's a toxic workplace, financial ruin, or systemic discrimination, your brain treats that modern stressor exactly like a physical predator.
Like a tiger in the room.
Right. It floods your body with the stress hormone cortisol. In short bursts, cortisol saves your life. But over months or years, that constant cortisol bath becomes neurotoxic.
Neurotoxic. It poisons the brain.
It literally causes physiological wear and tear. It can shrink the hippocampus, which impairs your memory and your emotional regulation. The social environment directly damages the biological architecture.
Which means the way depression presents in the real world completely defies the movie tropes. Because it's this complex web of hidden biological and cognitive damage, it's not always the person crying in a dark room.
Far from it. And this brings us to the highly dangerous reality of high-functioning or smiling depression.
Smiling depression.
An individual can easily meet the full 5 of 9 diagnostic criteria for severe major depressive disorder while flawlessly executing their job, cracking jokes at parties, and maintaining a perfect social facade.
They just hide it completely.
They're aggressively masking the internal cognitive triad and that physical exhaustion. It is incredibly dangerous precisely because their support network thinks everything is totally fine.
Wow. We also need to differentiate MDD from its neighbors because they share a lot of property lines. Chronic anxiety is a huge one, right?
Definitely. Anxiety and depression are heavily co-occurring. They share similar neurobiological pathways and are often grouped clinically as internalizing disorders.
What about chronic lower-level depression?
That's called dysthymia. It's a lower grade but chronic depression lasting 2 years or more. But the most critical distinction a clinician must make is identifying bipolar disorder.
Because bipolar disorder introduces manic or hypomanic highs, right?
Yep.
Not just the depressive lows.
Exactly. And if a patient has experienced even a single manic episode in their entire life, their diagnosis shifts permanently to bipolar disorder, even if they spend the vast majority of their lives in deep depression.
Why is that distinction so important?
The reason this distinction is literally a matter of life and death is that treating bipolar depression with standard SSRI antidepressants alone, without a mood stabilizer, can literally trigger a severe manic episode.
Oh, wow. So a misdiagnosis can actively accelerate the illness.
It can be disastrous.
And speaking of medical risks, we have to acknowledge the ultimate gravity of this condition, suicidality.
Suicidality is not synonymous with depression, but it is the most severe possible outcome. The vast majority of people who die by suicide are suffering from a diagnosable mental health condition, with depression being the primary driver.
Right.
That is exactly why suicidal ideation is baked directly into the DSM criteria. It demands immediate clinical attention.
Zooming out, the World Health Organization consistently ranks depression as one of the leading causes of disability on the entire planet. Hundreds of millions of people.
It's a global crisis.
It intersects with the adolescent social media crisis, the global burnout epidemic at work, the substance use crisis, because people desperately try to self-medicate the pain.
Right, they just want the pain to stop.
So if you're listening to this and you're thinking about your friends, your family, your coworkers, if someone is smiling and seemingly crushing it, how are you, as a friend, actually supposed to spot it?
You have to look past sadness. Sadness is an emotion that is very easy to fake or hide. You need to look for subtle shifts in their baseline functioning. Watch for anhedonia. Have they quietly dropped the hobbies that used to totally define them?
That's a huge red flag.
It is. Look for unexplained, chronic physical fatigue. Pay attention to shifts in their energy levels or a subtle, pervasive pessimism about the future that echoes Beck's triad.
So, assuming things will always end badly.
Yeah, you're looking for a structural change in how they interact with the world, not just a frown.
We have covered incredible ground today. For everyone listening, we've dismantled the idea of depression as simple sadness. We've seen how our modern diagnostic checklists were born out of a 1980s crisis, prioritizing consistency over deep understanding. We explored how pioneers like Beck and Seligman revealed the mind's ability to rewrite its own reality toward defeat. And we've unpacked how the biopsychosocial model proves that environmental stress literally remodels the physical brain, proving the old chemical imbalance theory was a massive oversimplification.
And I want to leave you with a final mind-expanding thought derived from all of this research. We know our current DSM checklist groups totally opposite physical symptoms, like extreme weight loss and extreme weight gain, under one single umbrella label of MDD.
Right.
And we know our best treatments work, but we are just barely scratching the surface of why they work biologically. So, might we one day look back at major depressive disorder the exact same way we currently look at Hippocrates' black bile?
Wait, you think MDD isn't real?
Not exactly. But what if in 50 years science confirms that depression isn't a single illness at all, but a dozen completely different, highly specific neurobiological conditions that we just haven't learned how to name yet?
Wow. That completely changes the paradigm. It means we aren't at the end of mental health science. We are just at the very beginning of understanding the storm. I encourage you to keep questioning your assumptions, look past the surface level sadness in the people around you, and stay curious. Remember, you can't judge the structural damage of a hurricane just by looking at a few raindrops. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.